In this video, we'll be looking at the Mingda Magician X 3D printer. It's an entry-level printer with some advanced capabilities. Stick around. Welcome back. In this video, we'll be looking at the Mingda Magician X 3D printer. It's an entry-class 3D printer, and we'll get into all the details, but before that, let's dive right into the unboxing. Alright, so unboxing the device, all of the parts are stored in the styrofoam container. It's like a clamshell, bit of an enclosure. The top Z gantry is in the top portion. Once that's removed, we can take off the top, and the entire base with the Y assembly and the necessary cables are all pre-assembled. So it's really just a minimal number of parts. Got the Z gantry, which has the X and Z gantry combined, fully assembled. We have a filament spool holder, the lid to the enclosure, which is basically a toolbox that's part of the device's design. Got a power cord, of course, and then a bag full of accessories. You pop this open, see a few of the things in there. Obviously there's a manual, which includes the assembly and information like that. Got an Allen wrench set for all of the screws that need to be assembled. A spanner wrench. SD card for design files. Got the screws and a spare hot end. And couple meters of PLA. With that, next it was time to assemble this thing. So inside the manual they have a step-by-step process which identifies all of the things that need to be checked. Right there you check whether it's 220 or 110. And then the Z and X gantry just slides right in. We've got four screws in this, 2 in each side. To fix it in place, we can just use the Allen wrenches that they provide. Alright, with the machine fully assembled, let's get into some of the details of its construction and functionality. Starting with the glass bed. It does have a glass bed that's seated on a plastic base. This plastic base rides on an extrusion, on V wheels, and has a 6mm GT2 belt. Nice feature in the front is you can adjust the tension of that belt to make sure that as it stretches, you can compensate for that. The bed does wobble a little bit. You can move it around. I'm not sure how much that would have an effect on banding or print quality. We can find out a little bit later. But because this printer does have auto bed leveling, it should compensate at least for any yaw, pitch, or roll on this bed. Though it is a little flimsy. It feels a little flimsy. Not sure that gravity is going to compensate for all of that tolerance. The print head itself has a dual gear extruder, which is nice, 1.75. Dual gear is going to prevent breakage and stripping of the filament. Makes it really easy to feed it. You just pull back the tension, slide in there once it's heated up, and the rest is all automatic. It also rides on an extruded rail on the x-axis. Has how many? 3 V-groove wheels. And as well, it's a little wobbly. Now, ideally, we would be able to adjust this bottom wheel to compensate for that. But, you know, all said and done, if you're not running at high print speeds, gravity should hold it in the channel there and keep it from having issues. Also has dual fans on one side for the heat break, the other side for the filament. It's got a 0.4 nozzle, which looks like an E3D standard brass nozzle. Neat thing is about the ribbon cable for powering it. They kind of put it behind there and prevents them from having to use a drag chain, which is kind of a nice design. On the Z axis, we also have a ribbon cable, which this is a little clunky. It's not a very clean way to mount it on the machine. And as this Z axis moves around, then you know this could potentially interfere with things, but it does have this strap here to keep it from being disconnected. On the back side, We do have 8mm lead screws with your dual Y axis. Looks like NEMA 14s down there to move this up and down. Limit switch on the Y axis, you can see it here. The limit switch on the X axis is right here. Limit switch on the Z axis is different and unique. It has this little tab that sticks down here. It goes into a Hall effect sensor, so this is more an optical Z limit switch. Not sure why they chose that strategy, but nonetheless. Another thing worth mentioning on this machine is that I did find out that the spanner wrench does allow you to adjust the wheels, and so you can adjust this, and it effectively eliminated all the slop from this. So it's much tighter. Well, it's not much tighter, it's much smoother, and there's no wiggle. So I'd be much more comfortable in running this faster and being able to not worry about bending or the rigidity of the gantry. Same for the bed. After dialing it in, which there's a wheel here that were adjustable. These were tightened up on the bottom side, of course. And now there's like literally no wiggle in this bed, so it's very solid. I'm gonna have to do some more prints, and I'm sure the quality is only going to get better with those two tuning adjustments. That said, that's pretty much the gist of the design here. We've got a modular filament holder which can switch to the left or right side, which I'm not sure why, but you may need to do that. But with this dual gear weight extruder, you should be able to run TPU, PLA, ABS, maybe even some nylon. The limit on the hot end is 260 degrees Celsius, and the bed is 110 degrees Celsius. So ABS may be your only choice. The glass is a nice add-on for ABS and PLA as well. That said, let's look at some of the other functional details. It has these two SDA slots, or SD card slots, SD1 and SD2. These are passive, these aren't active. They're really just to hold your SD cards when you're not in use. On the front side, we do have a couple connectors. We've got the USB SD card slot and a USB-C, all of which you can transfer your files either by a thumb drive or a card or a direct connection using the Cura software. The main thing I don't care for about this machine is the home is all the way back, so when it finishes a print, it goes all the way back instead of presenting it to you to remove, so it makes it a little bit tricky. You've got to use the on-screen display to move the axis out so that you can retrieve your print. So that's a little bit wonky. It does have this nice little toolbox, which you can have your extra nozzle and tools in there to simplify where you store those things, and you know that they're always there. That's kind of a nice feature. This entire body, though, is all injection molded plastic, and although it doesn't feel very cheap, some of the elements like the bed base, which is really wobbly, feel like it might be attributed to that. I can feel there's a lot of supports underneath here to strengthen it and cause it to be more rigid, but it is pretty thin injection molded plastic. Same goes for the housing on this. You can see how much that flexes. It's not the most high-end machine, but the aesthetic and design of it's relatively nice. Injection molded cases over these stepper motors on the Y as well. And the top piece is injection molded, of course, with the handle. Now they always have handles. I've seen this on a few. I'm not sure where people are going to carry this, but I suppose that provides a solution for if you are taking it mobile. Okay, now the interface on this display is much different than most other printers in the same class. Generally, the printers will have like a setup, printing, and maintenance menu items, and they'll have 3 or so menu items that you can select, and that will hierarchically drill into the capabilities to manage and control the printer. This one's a little bit different. Kind of has this heads-up display, this is pretty much all you need If you want to print directly from the card from here, you just go to print. Now see, this is an issue that I've seen as well. They don't seem to debounce the screen, and it's not very high frequency refresh rate. Can cause it to miss button clicks. There we go. Then we click SD, and you can just select your item to print, and we'll automatically print it. I'm not going to print this one for now, but just give you an idea. If you want to preheat, the preheat screen is displayed, and it has some defaults set for PLA, ABS, TPU, and whether or not you just want to heat the nozzle, both, or just the hotbed. Now you notice as I'm clicking here, sometimes you'll hear double taps, and I think that's the problem with this interface is they don't debounce those touches. You can hear it. Sometimes it's hitting it twice, sometimes it's hitting it once, and that can be frustrating when you're working with selecting very specific things. Settings here. If we go into the menu, then we can do things like move the machine around. And then what the increments are, whether it's 10.1 or 1 millimeter. That said, you can't see that it's non-responsive here. It's one of those cases where it's acknowledging, it's not responding. Not sure if that's a firmware issue. I did upgrade this to the latest firmware just to ensure that rule out any issues that may have already been resolved. And it still seems to have some odd behavior there with that interface. Now, you can home the machine, again, as I mentioned, if we home all 3 axes. It pushes the build plate to the back, which for me isn't really desirable. I think that's kind of weird to put that all the way in the back. Would be nice to have it up front. Back to the display. It also has some things like extrude. You can load your new filament. You'll need to set the temperature, and then these I guess are presets. Yeah, fast, slow, normal, as well as how far you want to extrude, things like that. Percentages, how fast you want to print. You can increase the increment and adjust that here. Go back. And then for auto leveling the bed, it's pretty straightforward. You just hit this one leveling bed button. It'll automatically heat up the hot end and then perform a bilinear probing of the bed of 16 different probe points, which will give you a good characterization of the bed. Everything else is automatic. Once it takes those 16 probe points, it'll just be ready to go. You don't have to do anything else, which is pretty nice. Many of the other machines that I've seen in this class that say auto leveling generally require an interactive process. This machine's fully automatic, which is a nice feature. One thing to note about the steppers on this is it uses like the TMC step sticks. That's what they used to be called, at least, the silent step sticks. And this thing is extremely quiet. I always find myself checking on it while it's printing to make sure it didn't stop working, because it's almost entirely silent. I'd say realistically it's probably around 50 dB, and we'll have to try that a little bit later and see if I can get an actual reading on that. But in the shop here, we always have power supplies running and fans that are either for those power supplies or other machinery or my computer or things of that nature. So this thing's quieter than all of those items. So yeah, I always have to check on it to make sure that it's awake. All right, so now that it's probed the whole bed, it's ready to go. Then it's just a matter of, like I walked through earlier, selecting the print job, and it will automatically start and everything else. So you can, again, adjust the percentages, which are the print speed, the heat, things like that. The only problem about just selecting the print job and having it print is it'll only heat the bed and then the extruder, whereas if you do a preheat sequence, it'll heat them both at the same time, which is a little bit quicker. So if you're in a rush, probably better to do a preheat and then select your print job. That said, we'll let this thing do its thing and print out a couple samples. Alright, so I printed a number of things off of the SD card. A couple of them are custom, a couple are some mechanical parts that I had used in a project. This one came directly off the card, which is some sort of reindeer. It was printed in place, so it's kind of weird, flexible reindeer. I'm not sure why, but it printed in a horizontal manner, and then these antlers were added back in afterward. The print on this turned out good. It had a raft. Everything on the card that came stock has a raft, which is makes me a little curious. Like, why do you need a raft if you have auto bed leveling? So these were set up for success to ensure that it printed well, even if the auto bed leveling didn't work. So, but the you can see the surface finish on there is pretty good. There's a little striation in there. I think that's actually the filament. But there's no banding to speak of, and the surface quality is great. I don't know what they used for the slicer because these were pre-installed on the SD card. So this one I'm just kind of set it aside because I'm not sure the parameters around how they made this. These, on the other hand, which is the test train that I've done on some of the other printers, these are printed with no support. The wheels obviously aren't printed in place, but they are horizontally next to the model on the build plate. You can see without support, this printed really well. There's relatively no problems with it, other than there was a little banding going on in the front section here. You can see that that's not great. But everything else looks really, really good. Look at the caboose, which has some pretty thin pillars here. And it all came out really well. No stringing, no banding per se, no supports. Pretty good detail. So the quality on that was good. On these two parts, these were for one of my time-lapse sleds that I created, some herringbone gears. Surface quality on them is good, although I'd never used PLA for a functional mechanical part. Surface finish on them is great. These are all printed at 0.2 layer height. Can go down to 0.1, but the time that it takes is just exponentially longer. The only thing different on these is I did do ironing, a Cura feature that's really nice on giving a nice surface finish. Ironing on these top surfaces looks really great. This is the bed side, so maybe not as perfect as the top side. But yeah, really good part quality. I'd be happy to use this machine to print some mechanical or parts for, you know, organizing tools or other things that you may need in the shop. It's not the fastest printing device. My Taz uses a 0.8 nozzle. I can whip things out on that in no time, especially if you're prototyping. This, you might get a better surface quality if you're looking for a finished part. and not have to deal with all the calibration issues of the Taz. But otherwise, not so bad. Looks great. So there you have it, the Mingda Magician X 3D printer. It's an entry-class machine with some advanced capabilities. That said, the construction is pretty solid. Even though it is largely made out of injection molded plastic, has some neat features that other machines don't have, and it supports PLA, TPU, and ABS, and does it silently, which is kind of nice. So if you work in an environment where you need those elements and those capabilities, then this might be a machine that you'd want to consider. Check it out. I'll put links in the description. You can go to their website. They also make a larger version of this, which is the Max or the Pro. Those go up to 14 inches bed size. So if you want to consider something that's a little bit cheaper but has some advanced capabilities, this may be the product for you. It's not a bad printer. I'm glad they sent it over. I was happy with the results that I got, and I'm going to pay it forward and give it to a friend or a local maker, which will probably make their day. So that said, if you like this particular video, give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell. It'll keep you notified when new videos are posted. In the meantime, be safe, have fun, and I'll see you next time. Hey, if you liked the video, please subscribe to the channel. It's how we're building the community. Also allow me to bring better content. Also check me out on these other social networks. There's lots of cool stuff there too.